Hello everyone, this is the Lack of Davening on Shabbos number 7, and today I'd like to deal with omissions of rabbis throughout the generations from davening on Shabbos simply because, in their opinion, it was a request and they didn't hold from all the leniencies. And let's begin. Rav Moshe Sternbuch writes in his responsum that Hagrach Mibrisk Zatzal, namely Reb Chaim Mibrisk, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, the grandfather of the famous Rav Soloveitchik, Tamal הנוסח יהי רצון שאומרים לפני ברכת החודש שמרווחים לפרנסה עושר וכבוד על חילוץ עצמות ועלו אסור לשאול צרכיו בשבת. Reb Chaim Brisker didn't understand how we bench Rosh Chodesh on Shabbos with that long Yehi Ratzon. Now that Yehi Ratzon is already written in the Gemara in a different context. We utilize it as the benching of Rosh Chodesh, but it's an absolute request. We ask for a long life. We ask for many, many different things, and therefore he wouldn't say it on Shabbos. I'm sure he benched Rosh Chodesh and said Rosh Chodesh would be on this and this day, but he didn't say the Yehi Ratzon because simply it is a request. Number 2, the Gra came along and said, according to the same responsum of Rav Sternbuch, that in the Birkat HaMazon you shouldn't say specifically, Harakamanu Yefarnesenu B'chavod, God, you should give us parnasa with dignity. Namely, maybe you could say all the Harachamans, like the Mishnah Brura has said, because we say him every day, but that specific one he felt very uncomfortable with, simply because that is A, a request, B, very tangibly vachadik, namely a parnasa, and therefore he didn't say it. And finally, he writes that the Chazon Ish, when he benched Rosh Chodesh, at the end of the benching, we say Yechadesheyu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Aleinu, God should renew for us this new month, L'tova L'livracha, etc., etc. And as everybody knows, there's 2 different ways of saying it. The short way, which is usually said in Nusach Ashkenaz and Chutz La'aretz, and a longer version, which is said usually in Israel. From this perspective, the Chazon Ish, Amar HaNusach HaKatzar, V'lo amar kol ha'bakashot shel parnasa v'chalkala kenusach shelanu. He specifically said this shorter one because the longer one has tangible requests of, again, weekday-oriented needs, and he didn't feel comfortable to say it on Shabbos. Going on, the Sharei Tshuva. The Sharei Tshuva, not by Rabbeinu Yonah, but the Sharei Tshuva on Shulchan Aruch Chaim. It was written by Rav Chaim Margaliot, his year 1780 to 1820. He was the brother of Rav Ephraim Zalman Margaliot that we quoted so many times. Indeed, in this Sharei Tshuva, he enumerates many, many of the poskim up until his time to give you a full picture of what they said. So, in this context, he writes, Bakashat Ribon Olamim, in between Shalom Aleichem and Eshet Chayil and many benchers, there's a big Ribon HaOlamim. Ein la'omra Erev Shabbat. You shouldn't say it Friday night. Rather, the minhag is, you should say Ribon HaOlamim ad melech tamim darko she'ino rach shevach bilvad. In that Ribon HaOlamim, if you ever look in the bencher, there's many requests. And indeed, according to the Sharei Tshuva, you shouldn't say all the requests, even though they're written in the bencher, because we don't request on Shabbos. Now, I have to admit that these examples are fascinating, because many of them are only said on Shabbos, benching Rosh Chodesh, that Ribon HaOlamim, and therefore it's fascinating that not only do most of the world say it, but they were instituted specifically for Shabbos, even though they're requests. Having said that, there's one part of davening we didn't deal with, and that is the passage all the way at the end of the Amidah, and that is Elohai Netzor. We finished all the blessings of the Amidah, the 7 blessings for Shabbos. HaMevarech et Amo Yisrael B'Shalom. We said Yehu Ratzonim Refi V'Hegyon Libi Lefanecha Hashem Tzuri V'Goali. And now we have a passage called Elohai Netzor. Beautiful passage, but it's not part of a bracha, so it doesn't fall under the Yerushalmi's Tofes Brachot Kachu. If it's a bracha you say every day, you say it on Shabbos. So what's the heter to say it on Shabbos? So I'm assuming there are rabbis that maybe don't say it, and you're looking at one of them. But if you do say it, there seems to be two specific reasons why. One specific to Elohai Netzor, the other a more general one. The specific reason is given to us by the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah basically says that if you look into Elohai Netzor, it actually doesn't have any sort of she'ilat tzrachim, requests, but rather, says the Mishnah Berurah, charatat avonot. Namely, we start saying Elohai Netzor l'shani meira, make sure my mouth does not speak lashon hara. And if I did, I feel very bad. Betach libi b'toratecha, spiritual, but you don't have any requests in there, and therefore it's okay to confess for sins on Shabbos, not to request. However, long before the Mishnah Berurah, there was what we call the Ravid Hasheni, the second Ravid, better known for his book Sefer HaEshkol. He also wrote a responsum, and in his responsum, of Avraham, Rabbi Yitzchak Av Beistin, we're talking about early Rishonim, his years 1085 to 1158. He functioned out of Narbona in Provence, and he says that according to the Yerushalmi, that says only brachot you're allowed to say. So how do we say this Elohai Netzor and the Harachamans and all that? He basically says, and I quote his words, Klomar, she'eino mikara bracha, v'lo nikfra bracha al kach, ela shema'arich, hachanami kema'arich b'berkat hatova metiv. According to the Ravid, the reason you're allowed to say the Harachamans is simply because you started a bracha, hatova hametiv, the fourth bracha of the benching, and you're just elongating it. Elongating an existing bracha is allowed on Shabbos, even if you request. Same thing with Elohai Netzor. It's basically elongating the Sim Shalom. Yes, you said a bracha already. Yes, you finished your actual formal Shmoneh Esrei. And yes, if you have to answer Kedusha, you should say Yehiyu L'Ratzon and answer Kedusha and forget about Elohai Netzor. That is the halacha. But all you're doing is elongating an existing bracha. And ultimately, that's probably what the Or Zarua means. The Or Zarua from Ashkenaz says, V'al zeh anu somchim, this is what we rely on. Sha'anu mitpalelim b'Shabbat Elohai Netzor, hanami tofes tefillah kenu. It's basically part of the davening. Namely, it's part of the bracha. And explains the Ben Ish Chai, in my opinion, the cardinal rule in this regard. The Ben Ish Chai, in his response from Rav Pa'alim, comes along and says that the only prohibition of requesting on Shabbos is going to be something that, and I quote, Heicha shekol echad yisader lo she'ela uvakasha hatzricha le'atzmo v'livnei beito. Namely, a new request that only you need at a specific time, l'fi ha'et v'l'fi hazman asher titaveh nafsho. Namely, you happen to need right now to daven for a specific person that's sick, or you need right now a lot of money in the bank. Zeu de asur. That's what's forbidden on Shabbos. And then he quotes the Maharash Yafeh from a book called Torah Lishma that says exactly the same things. Namely, the prohibition is likvoa davar mechudash she'eino ragil likvoa v'cholata mishum onek Shabbos shelo yavi daga belibo. So ultimately, in my opinion, according to these poskim, the second Ravid, the Or Zarua, as explained by the Ben Ish Chai, the only prohibition of requests on Shabbos would not be regular requests in the siddur we say every day. That's allowed. Elongating a bracha for sure would be allowed. The only request not allowed would be a new one that's not in there every day that only you need. And that, of course, is not Elohai Netzor. That's not the Harachamans. That's something new. Something that comes up in your regular weekday davening. But not something that would come up only on Shabbos.
Shuloi malaiche malacha yashuloi malacha yashurais malacha yevevelioi mi mevelech malchai amlu buchem yo